Howdy doody, my name is Susie and today I thought I would share with you how to make these beautiful coffee filter peonies. And my inspiration came from this Victoria magazine where they had the most beautiful Easter table setting. And as you can see, look at those beautiful flowers. So I wanted to make something that resembled these flowers. These aren't a true replica of any specific peony in nature. They are just my interpretation of what I think a peony looks like. So from this photograph, I have a very small loose peony. So we're going to be making the smaller loose peony, and that has the yellow center. We're going to be making the large peony, which is very round and bulky, and I think kind of typical of some of the peonies that you'd find in the garden. We're also going to be making what I'm calling the ball peony. And you can see these are the peonies that are always kind of like drooping off the side of a vase. And we're also going to be making the bud peony. And this is just another add-on. So I wanted to make all these flowers to create a really beautiful bouquet. So what I've decided to do is, because there's a lot to cover, is I'm going to cover this video in 3 parts. So the first part, we're going to be making the large peony and the small peony. And the second part, we're going to be making the ball peony and the bulb. And in the third video, I'm going to cover strictly the leaves and how to do those. So for this project, we're going to need our usual coffee filter type of material to make flowers. We're definitely going to need the coffee filters. And for all these flowers, I'm using 8 to 12 cup basket coffee filters. They come like this. There's about 100 to a pack. I buy these at the dollar store for $1.25 or $1.50. So you'll have to check around to see where you can find them. And they're approximately 7 3/4 inches in diameter. So we're going to need the coffee filters. We're going to need some food coloring in order to color the petals. We're going to need floral tape. We're going to need some wire, scissors. We're going to need school glue. We're also going to need a glue gun. And we're going to be using also some styrofoam balls, and they are going to create the base or the inside of every one of these flowers. Now, what I've also done is I've created a template. I've created a number of templates. So one of the templates is going to be strictly for the peony pattern. And this is the peony petal pattern. And there are 6 petals, stencils that you can trace out and use as templates, and the peony petal template will allow you to make any of these flowers. And then separately, there's going to be another template for the leaves, which is going to enable you to make the leaves. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to color our paper. Now, if you like the way the combination of these flowers look, and let me give you a close-up. So this is what the peonies look like. And they're all slightly different shapes and different colors. And there's a number of different colors because I was really experimenting. So some are solid, some are muted with a little bit of green, some have a little bit of yellow. So this was just trial and error. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to be concentrating on just making the large peony and the smaller peony. So those are the two flowers we're going to be making. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to dye our coffee filters. Now, you want to dye your coffee filters to create all your flowers. So they're going to be fairly similar in terms of how you dye the coffee filters. Now, if you want to make peonies that are really muted in color, like I've made mine, then I'm going to show you how to do it. This is how muted the colors are in comparison to a white piece of paper. I'm not sure if you can really see the difference. There's just a hint of color. And I'm also using, if you don't have, I use a pizza tray to dry my coffee filters, but if you don't have a pizza tray, this is the lining for your oven. It works really well too. So in order to make these very muted colors, and no two flowers are going to be identical, which is good. You want the variation, but you want maybe some sort of consistency in terms of the tone of the flowers. So I found that in order to create this very, very pale tone with your coffee filters, I took 1 cup of water, and then I went ahead. So here I'm using some Wilton, these are food colorings, there are 8, so there's more variation. This is crimson, they have rose, they've got yellow, or they call it amarillo, they've got orange, so they've got a number of other colors. And all I did, and you can certainly let your imagination run wild, but I added a couple of drops to my glass of 1 cup of water, and this is going to become my concentrate. So that I know is very pink, very hot pink, and I'm just going to add a dab of yellow because I just want to mute that color a little bit. And then I mixed my color, and you can see how strong it is. I can even add more food coloring to that if I want. And then I took my tester coffee filter and just dabbed the corner to see how dark that color would be. And you can see it there. So I would actually make that a bit darker. So the colors that I used mainly were the yellow, the crimson, and the pink to create all the different colors. And the color looks different in the glass than when you actually put it on your piece of paper. And you want to fold it over a couple times to really get that true color. So I like that tone. It's kind of somewhat salmony. This one is a lot pinker. You want to fold your filter a couple times to make sure. Whoa, that is bright yellow. So now I've got my bright yellow, a bright pink, and a bright orange. And that's great. So now these glasses are my concentrate. And the next thing I did was took a bowl. It's probably a good idea to do it on a plastic mat. So then I took about 4 cups of water. It doesn't matter, 3 cups, 2 cups, but enough water that you can dip all of your filters in. So after I made my concentrate flowers, Then I added this to my water, and I just found it much easier to control the color. And I just kept adding until I get the tone that I like. And it's very pale. And I just keep doing that until I get the tone that I like. And I think you can see it's a very pale pink. So now that I've got the tone that I like, what I did was I took, and I work with 4 coffee filters at a time, because I find that the paint will actually penetrate through all 4 filters, plus they take less time to dry. And I just dipped my coffee filter. And I think you can tell the color. So I have a very nice light tone of pink, and I did that with a more orangey. So this color is definitely more of an, has a little bit more salmon color to it. So after I've dipped my coffee filters in my light solution, then I just came back and dipped the center in that concentrated solution. And then I got something like this. Take that color almost 3/4 of the way up. You're gonna want that dark center for the center of the flowers. I'll show you this way how the color was infused in the middle and goes lighter. So it just gives you more depth to the flower. And I think when you move it in the light, you can see that dark pink on the inside. And this just works out well for any of the flowers that you do, because it really gives you that depth, or a sense of depth to the flower, which makes it look more realistic and creates additional interest. This is not a hard science. You can certainly do anything that you like, but you can see I've done some that have smaller centers, larger centers, but I basically worked with these 3 colors in order to create a variation for everything. And even if you decide that you want to make a white peony, such as this, and the outside of this peony is also white, even if you want to do something white, I would recommend that you take your coffee filters and you dip them in water and dry them, because dipping them in water and drying them changes the texture of the coffee filter. It makes them more pliable, and it allows you to create more of this ruffled effect. So even if you want white coffee filters, dip them in water and dry them. But even with the white coffee filters, I still added a very, very pale hue, just so it's not so stark white. Then after you paint all your coffee filters, you're going to take this and you're going to put it in a 250-degree oven for 5 minutes. Remember, we've got 4 layers of coffee filters, and it's going to take 5 minutes for them to completely dry. So now we've got our coffee filters all dyed. We're going to go over to the table and we're going to start making our flowers. So this is part 1 of coffee filter peonies, and we're going to be making the large peony, and we're going to be making the small loose peony with the yellow center. So I've created a pattern which is attached to this video in the link, and it's the peony petal pattern. And you can see there's 6 patterns for 6 different petals. With this pattern, depending on the combination of petals and the number of petals you use, you'll be able to create all of these flowers. So we're going to be making the large peony, and I've also included the instructions on how to put together the large peony. It tells you how many coffee filters and how many coffee filters for each one of the petals that you're going to be copying from the template. So for our large peony, we're going to need an 18 gauge wire like this. And we're going to be starting all of our peonies with a styrofoam ball. And there's two sizes of the styrofoam balls. This is 1 3/4, and there's also 2 1/2, which we're going to be using for the ball peonies. So all the peonies are starting off with the ball. I tried making them by creating a ball with toilet paper or paper towel, but honestly, you use up a lot of paper towel and you don't get the perfect sphere that makes it much easier to create the peony, because part of the design in the peony is you want it to look like a ball. So you don't want it to be flat on the underside of the flower, which would create a different flower. You want it to be rounded. And I found that the styrofoam ball works the best. So I started off with my 18 gauge, and this is 18-inch wire. You want to create a little loop like this. And then you're just going to puncture the ball, insert it. And with your glue gun, you're just going to add some glue to that hole. And you can just hold it in place until it dries. So we're going to set this off to the side. And now we're going to start cutting our petals. So for the large peony, there's 9 coffee filters, and of course you're going to pick whatever colors that you like. But I will say that creating a little bit of different colors depending on the pattern change does create that greater dimension and depth of color, making the flower look more realistic. So you get that kind of darker color in the center. So we're going to need 2 filters of petal number 1. And that's the center. So in this one, I made the center lighter. So I'm going to grab 2 coffee filters of the lighter. And then we're going to need 2 coffee filters of petal number 2. And this is actually a fold. So this petal opens up. It's quite large. And I want to change the color a little bit because I want to be able to see that layer of petals. So then 2 petals. And then we're going to need 3 coffee filters for petal number 3, and it's this little ruffly. So again, I'm going to come in with some light colors. 3 filters of petal number 3. And then we're going to need 1 coffee filter of petal number 4, the heart. 1 coffee filter of petal number 4, which is the outermost layer, and I'm going to want it to have a little bit of dye. So now I've got all my coffee filters. This is starting from the middle. So from the middle, I want 2 filters of petal number 1. And all you're going to do is you're going to fold it. Fold your filter in half. Fold your filter again. Fold your filter again. And then fold it one more time. So it's this size. And this is the template that we're going to be cutting out. Now, in order to make it easier for you, I've also added another template where I have folded the filters and added the template. So just be looking at, you don't have to count how many folds. Just by looking at it on the template, you can see how many times to fold it. And these are so simple that with a pencil, I can just come in and just create my mark, cut out your template, and then I'm gonna open it up like this. And I wanna be able to separate each one of the petals, and I'm gonna cut it 3/4 of the way down. And you would cut this while it was closed, but I'm just doing it like this so you can see. So you get something that looks like this. So I'm just gonna put that down here. The next, you want 2 filters. So you want 2 filters for the next petal, which is petal number 2. Where is it? Petal number 2. And for petal number 2, you're going to take your coffee filter, fold it over once, fold it over twice, and you're going to fold it over again like you have in the template. And this is the fold right here. So we folded it like this. You've got all the openings on this side. The fold is here. Your template is going to go along the fold. So we're just going to be tracing out this side. Start off always about halfway down or 3/4 of the way up your template to get that curve so that these are loose, and that will also help when you separate the petals. So you cut out your pattern. This is the actual petal because this was the fold. And when you open it, you should have 4 sections like this. And you're just gonna cut those down 3/4 of the way down. So we're separating the petals. And I'm gonna just stack that on top of my last one. It's also a good idea to keep a garbage bag handy and a vacuum because you're gonna end up with all these little pieces everywhere. So next we're gonna need 3 coffee filters of petal number 3. Petal number 3. And we're gonna take our coffee filters, fold it once, fold it twice, fold it again, so you can see how our petal or our template of our petal fits in there. And again, when you refer to your template, you can easily match up how many times you fold it based on that. Oops. And you see how when you draw it out, it's curved. So you really want to cut into the side. Just easier. To cut it like so and then come in and cut out those little, they look like little teeth, just to separate those petals. And we've got something like this. So that's our next layer. And then we've got for the last petal, one filter, petal number 4. One filter, petal number 4. It's the heart-shaped petal. And we're just going to fold it in half. And you don't have to memorize how many folds, because if you just fold the filter enough times, the template would fit right inside it. So it just makes it easy. Cut 3/4 of the way down and just separate all those petals. And that's our last stack. So now I take my stack and I flip it over, and I know I've got everything in order, and I'm just gonna grab one at a time to make my flower, starting off with the middle petals. Now I've got my styrofoam ball and it's glued onto my wire, but I want to cover up the ball before I add any of these petals. And that's why any leftover bits and pieces, and I didn't create a pattern for this, but you just want to use any leftover bits and pieces for the center of your flower. A scrap piece of paper like this, which I want to adhere to the top of the bulb. And I actually might do another one. If it's too light, I might add another one. And to secure this first petal to your ball, then I use school glue. And I use the school glue because it makes the paper malleable enough that it conforms perfectly to the ball. So I just add a whole bunch of glue and I cover the ball, and then just smooth it out so that it's like that. You can see it doesn't go all the way down. It's just like that. Now I'm actually going to add another piece because I want it a little tiny bit darker. So that's why it's good to keep all your scraps. And I just add it on top just because I want the center, that color, to stand out a little bit and create more dimension. And next, I'm going to start with my first petal, and I'm going to take one petal at a time. You're going to pierce the middle of the petal. So this is really easy. And you're going to push it to the top. This is where you need your glue gun. So what I do is I add a bead of glue to the bottom of the ball, just so that petal is secure. And now I can work with that. And I do this with every flower and every petal. One drop at the bottom of the ball holds it in place so you can figure out what to do next. What I'm going to do, and I've tried marking it so that you can see, is I'm going to apply my glue like this. So you can see the first circle. I'm going to apply glue around here to the top of the bulb. And then I'm going to take my petal and I'm going to wrap it around like this and hold it in place until it looks like this. Then the second bead of glue, we're going to come down just a little tiny bit on the ball. So we're going to add, say, our first bead of glue here. We're going to add our next bead of glue just slightly below. This is what we want the center to look like, but we want it to be glued nice and tight 3/4 of the way up the ball. Then we're going to take our next petal, which is number 2 of the first petal, or it's the second of the first. And again, and this is when these petals are too small, it's not going to make a difference. But when you have wider size petals, you want to try and position it so that the next petal covers any gap that's on top. So I just add a dot of glue to the base and I hold it in place so that it gives me some control over what I'm doing. And then, like I said, the next glue, I'm gonna put just a little bit below. Just a little bit below the first. And I'm just gonna do it in small sections because the glue dries very quickly. So that's the next set of petals glued. So you can see that's easy. And I know that when I ruffle it up, I'm gonna get this effect. So now our next petal is this very wide petal. I'm gonna pierce it through the center. And once we make one flower, I'm not gonna have to explain it like this step by step. You'll understand the concept. So now we've got these wide petals, one dot at the bottom, and that secures my petals in place so they don't move. And the reason I don't want them to move is because now I am going to add a bead of glue halfway down the ball. Halfway. So you can see we're just adding a bead of glue. We're gradually coming down. And what this is going to do is allow each set of petals to open further and further so that we can create that ball. So the next set of glue is going to be about halfway around the ball, but I'm only going to do one dot so you can see how the petal is going to be. I'm going to do one dot halfway up, stretch that petal, and just stick it on like this. The next petal, and you can see that because these are individual petals, they're going to overlap. So we want the next petal, one dot in the middle, and all you have to do is pull it straight up and adhere it there. The next petal, one dot in the middle, and you can see how the petals are overlapping each other. And there's 4 petals. So you're just tacking on 4. Whoops. So now you can see that we've secured the 4 petals, and all we're going to do is we're going to come around and we're just going to tack these 2 petals together, but we're not going to pull it really tight. We're just going to tack them down here all the way around. In order to create, we want to keep the bottom like a ball. So in order to keep it like a ball, I think you can see where that overlaps. You just put a little dot there and it tacks it in place. So it starts to create a cup. Here's another one that's overlapping. We just add a bead of glue there and we tack it there. You see it's creating a cup. And we're just going to tack it down. And you're tacking it down at the base. Don't tack it up here because then you won't be able to open the flower. You see how we can still flare out those petals if we want, but it's creating this cup on the bottom. Oh, there's one more petal. And it's just a dot like this to tack it. So we've got this nice cup on the bottom and it's creating this circular effect. The other thing I like to do in between petals is just round off that ball. Keep it nice and round. And don't be afraid to squish this because we're going to be opening it up afterwards. So our next set of petals, we're going to do the same thing. So this is our next set of petals. And every time you add on a new set of petals, you want to position it so you're alternating the petals at all time. So now I know that that's in the right position. I'm just gonna add a bead of glue to the bottom place. And I know I'm gonna wanna bring that petal up, stretched like that, and I'm gonna add halfway up that ball, so right there. So you can see that it's pulled taut. The bead of glue is just halfway on the flower, like this. So the petals are secured in the center, and then I'm gonna come around and just add a bead of glue down here, wherever the petals overlap, like that. And I'm gonna do that all the way around. And I just round off any edges like that. Now we've got a different set of petals like this. We're gonna do the exact same thing. Fish it through, place it where it covers and alternates with the above petal, secure it in place. So it's like this. And once you make enough of these, they go pretty fast. And again, I'm gonna add a bead of glue at just below the halfway mark. So I'm gonna be adding a bead of glue down, down, down until I get to only a quarter of the way from the bottom row. Tack the flower in. So now it's slightly below the last bead of glue. And I'm going to do that to every petal. And you just add a bead of glue, pull the petal in place, and it holds. Bead of glue, pull the petal in place. Bead of glue, pull that petal in place. And that's it, you see? See how it's like this? And with these, round it off and conform it to the ball. Now these petals are much smaller, so we don't need to attach either side. We're just tacking them in place, and I'm gonna do the whole thing all over again. Bead of glue, pull it in place, glue, and you can see that if you pull them straight up, they will naturally just overlap. Bead of glue, pull it straight up, and then this is the last set. Pull, and then the very last petals, position them in the way that you like. So they're like this. And the last set of petals, we're gonna just put it a little bit below the last one. We're gonna tack it about here because we want this to really kind of flop out. So about a little bit below the last petal, a little bit below the last petal. So you can see I'm tacking it here, tacking it about 3/4 of the way down from the ball. And they will conform. So now you've got this. You want to really round it off. And we're gonna munch up those little petals. We're just gonna bend all those little pieces. Now the next step, add some petals to the bottom of this. So we're gonna add some little leaflets and petals to the bottom. There is a little pattern which is in with the leaves. So there actually is a pattern for the leaves with the leaf pattern. The stem leaf. So when you're dyeing your coffee filters, if you're going to be creating the leaf stems, then you probably will be making this. Otherwise, you can just use little scraps of paper to create 3 little petals. We're going to attach 3 of these little petals to the bottom of each flower, and we're going to bend this bottom So if I was to take it away, you can see how it's cupped. I'm using the school glue because it's easier to conform those little petals to the bottom. And every time I glue these little leaves, I apply the glue everywhere, but I leave the tips without glue. With the school glue, it conforms. You wouldn't have this much time to play with it if you were using the glue gun. So that's it. We're just creating like a little cup. And the reason that I didn't glue the tips is because if I want to furl them out, oops, then I can. And that just creates a little bit more visual interest, if you can see that. Your 3 little leaves, and you actually need these because the next step is to create our stem for our flower. And we're using a straw, a bendable straw. And I just take the end of the straw and just cut it twice so that when I push it up into the flower, it's gonna have these 4 little legs like that. And I just fill up that straw with a bead of glue, and then I can push it up into the flower, and those little cuts that we made, you can see, they just hold on to the flower. And I glue the bottom. And then what I do is I just come along and I just cut off this little edge and flare it up. So it's a point. I just cut that part off. It'll just make it easier to wrap the stem. Before we add our floral tape, in order to help it secure initially, because this is plastic, we're gonna take those little tiny leaflets. I'll just take 5. You're gonna take these little leaflets and you can just use the pattern or just cut them out yourself. We'll give the little leaflets a fold. We're gonna add a bead of glue to the tip of the leaf. We're going to glue it to the straw because once we glue all the petals, then that is going to have a little paper collar, which is going to be much easier for the tape to adhere to. And you'll see how these little details actually, it all adds to the design of the flower, but it also has a practical use. So now you can see we've created a little collar paper, and we've got these little leaves that I think look really cute. And now we can take our piece of floral tape. And floral tape is this waxy, stretchy tape. And you can start it here. You can actually start it by adding a bead of glue because you're adding the glue to the paper if you want. And it makes it very easy to start that flower. And the other reason for the bendable straw, because it has these ribs, it really helps the tape hold on to the straw because the straw is plastic and slippery. So we're just slightly stretching the tape and twisting. Stretching and twisting, stretching and twisting. So now we've got everything done. Now is the exciting part. We start opening up our flower, and all you want to do is start just peeling back the layers gently. Nothing too harsh, rash. And you want to start separating the petals like this. And I wouldn't open them too far You just really want to separate them. And you will notice that as you separate them, your flower really does start to emerge. Now you can start seeing why there's a different pattern of petal and why we are doing them in this order, because it starts to create a design. But I think you can start to see how that darker center, these were just 2 filters that were a slightly darker pink, but you can see that it really does create a lot of depth in your flower. Now this looks great on its own, but I always like to try and conform it to more of a ball. And this is up to you, because at this point you can do whatever you want. And I try to create the shape of the ball. And I'm doing this looking into the camera. It's easier if I'm looking at the flower. So this is the large peony, and of course, if you wanted this even bigger and fuller, then you could definitely just add, you can see how the more you scrunch it, the more of a bowl shape that you get. And that's why we wanted to gradually start with the glue at the top and gradually move the bead of glue further and further down until we got to about 3/4 of the way with the last petal, because now you can see that the petals can all flow and layer. Had we glued everything up here, our flower would be small and tight up here. But with the graduating of glue going further and further down along the ball, then you create these great open layers. So that's the large peony. So now we're going to be making the small peony, and the concept is exactly the same. We're going to be using some different petals, and we'll be going faster because I've already shown you the technique in terms of gluing. And for the small peony, we're going to need 8 coffee filters. Now this is the peony that has the yellow center. So we're going to need 2 filters for petal number 1. Petal number 1, which is this. And I'm going to use 1 yellow and 1 white coffee filter, just so that the color isn't so strong, but you can do whatever you like. And no matter what template you're using, you're always going to come in and separate every petal by cutting down 3/4 of the way. Then we're going to need 2 filters of petal number 2. Petal number 2. And what color did I use? 2 filters, and I'm going to go with, I'm going to keep that center of the flower. I want to keep it a little bit distinctive. So I'm going to use 2 filters of number 3 in this salmon color. You could even make your own templates, but this just really kind of helps guide you. And again, when you're cutting out these patterns, you want to always cut in and round off these sides. So we're making it round on either side. For the last petals, I'm going to use white. No, we're going to need 3 filters. 1, 2, 3. And this is just a guide. Use more filters and see what that turns out like. You know, you can switch up the order, whatever it is, but this is a good guide to start with. And, you know, you, depending on how it looks to you, you can add or subtract petals later on. So we need 3 filters of petal number 4, which is the heart petal. And split those petals. So now we've got our layers, all our layers of petals. I flip it over and I know that this is the center that I'm going to be starting to work from. So we've got our ball and we're going to do the same thing. Start with the glue close to the top, then the next row, then the next row, then the next row. So with all flowers, we need something for the top of our flower. We're doing it with the school glue. And it makes it much easier to conform. We're going to start with our petal sequence. We're going to start off with our first petal. Starting off with the white. We're adding a bead to the bottom. Position that petal. Oh, that just gave me an idea for echinacea flowers. My top, I'm going to create that ring of glue and just glue it like that. I'm going to do the same thing with the next one. And remember, these are the stamens, so we want to glue them fairly close to the top. We'll put one bead of glue on the bottom, a little bit below the last row of glue. And then, so you can see we're getting this. And that's what we want, like a little bit of variation. I just squeeze it into a ball. We're going to open this up at the end, but it just keeps it out of the way, makes it easy. Then we're going to take our next flower. And now that we've got our two centers, we're going to start in the middle. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to add one petal at a time. So you want a dot, pull that petal up, and it holds. A dot, pull that petal straight up, and it holds. A dot, pull that petal straight up, and it holds. One dot. And if you pull it straight up, it will just naturally overlap the last, and that's what we're trying to do. A dot, pull that petal straight up and it holds, then shape that bottom and do the next. Try and position it alternating. Add the dot to the bottom to secure your petals. And you're going to start all over again. A little bit less than the last time. Pull it up. I'll do it this way. A dot of glue just a little bit below that last row of glue. So now it's turning out like this. And we're going to keep going. Bringing that bead of glue slightly lower every time. So you can see it's starting to look nice. And you're always bringing that bead of glue just a little bit lower than the last row. There you go. Create that shape. Mush up those guys. We're going to do the exact same thing that we did with the large coffee filter. And that is, we're going to add the 3 petals on the bottom. All you have to do is cut a circle and then notch out a few of those little, create those little teeth on top. Now is when we add our straw. I don't have to add 5 leaflets. I just added 4. It doesn't really make a difference. And you can flare these little guys out. I'm being generous with the floral wire. So now, like our other flower, to ruffle it up a bit. And gently start separating all those little petals. So all I do is hold it by its neck, and I try to conform it to a ball by holding it like this. So there you go. This is the small peony, and you can see what I mean about just using one different coffee filter in the middle of all those other coffee filters. Look how much depth and dimension that you get. And your flower looks white, but the center is saying, I've got a lot of depth. So I think that looks really pretty. So this is the end of part 1. Here is your large peony. And here is the small peony. Slightly different, but a mixture of the two would look beautiful in a vase. So this is the end of part 1. I hope to see you in part 2 and part 3, where we're going to make the ball peony in part 2 and the leaves in part 3. Oh, and I just wanted to add that some people thought the my first coffee filter flower video was on making roses, and they thought the roses looked a little bit like peonies, and I guess they do, but they certainly look more realistic and like roses in real life. So in case you couldn't tell before, the peonies and here are the roses. So I think you can tell the difference between the flowers. So if you enjoyed this video, I hope you give me a like. If you try these and you like them, I hope you share them. And if you'd like to see more content, I hope you subscribe.